Have you ever had one of those memories from when you were a kid? Something that doesn't just stick with you but kinda haunts you? Yeah, this is mine. And I've never told anyone the whole thing. Not really. Not even my parents. It happened back in the fall of 1998 when I was just 9 years old. I was in Mrs. Pendleton's 4th grade class at Willow Ridge Elementary. Our class had been buzzing for weeks about this field trip to Hollow Creek Nature Center. It wasn't a real zoo or anything fancy like that. It was more like one of those nature preserves with animals, trails, and old buildings full of wildlife exhibits and dusty displays. They said it was educational. We thought it sounded boring. But a day out of school? We were all in. I remember the morning we left. It was one of those gray, quiet mornings where the sky looks like a big wet blanket. Light rain was spitting now and then, just enough to make your hoodie damp. The air smelled like wet leaves and cold metal. The ride there was just normal kid stuff. Loud talking, dumb jokes, and that one kid, Joey, who always brought snacks that made the whole bus smell like cheese. The nature center was about an hour outside town, tucked into the woods. I remember thinking it looked more like someone's backyard than a real place for kids to visit. Anyway, when we got there, we all filed off the bus and followed the chaperones toward the main gate. There wasn't much security or anything, just a small ticket booth, a wooden archway, and a gravel path that split off into different directions. We could see a few fenced-in animals, goats, a sleepy fox, some peacocks shrieking like they were in pain. It wasn't the coolest place ever, but it had this weird charm, like it hadn't changed in decades. The main building on the property was this old lodge-looking thing with peeling paint, foggy windows, and a slanted roof. That's where they kept the taxidermy animals and indoor displays. You know, educational stuff. That part creeped me out even before anything went wrong. Now, I should say. Back then, I was kind of a weird kid. Quiet. Off in my own world a lot. My mom always said I was imaginative, but I think I just had trouble fitting in. While the other kids clumped together, I liked wandering on my own, watching things from the edges, so when the class moved into the building I kinda hung back. Inside it smelled like old wood and mothballs. The lighting was weird, kind of yellowish and dim like they never replaced the bulbs. There were dusty glass cases with raccoons, birds, and even a stuffed bear, all posed like they were frozen mid-step. Everything looked frozen in time. At some point, I had to use the bathroom. I didn't tell anyone, I just slipped away while the group was looking at some boring exhibit about native birds. The bathroom was around the corner down a narrow hallway. It was quiet. I mean, really quiet. No voices, no footsteps. Just the hum of the old lights and the distant tapping of rain on the roof. After I was done, I stepped back into the hallway. And it was empty. Like totally empty. No teachers, no students. No sound at all except my own footsteps. I figured they had moved on without me. No big deal, right? But instead of going back the way I came, I turned down another hallway. One we hadn't gone down yet. I was curious. That's what got me into trouble. This hallway was different. The lights were dimmer and the carpet, yeah, there was carpet, was this deep red color stained in spots like something had leaked through. The glass displays were weirder too. The animals here weren't just posed, they looked twisted, like the taxidermist had done a rush job. One raccoon had glassy eyes pointing in different directions. A deer's mouth was stretched too wide, like it was mid-scream. And that's when I saw him. There was a man crouching behind a stack of folded chairs at the end of the hallway. I thought maybe he was a janitor or something. He was wearing a green jacket and had a baseball cap pulled low over his face. I actually laughed. I thought maybe he was hiding for fun, like a museum worker playing hide-and-seek with kids. Dumb, I know. He stood up slowly and started walking toward me. His smile didn't look friendly. It was thin and wrong. He asked, "Where's your group?" I shrugged and said, "I don't know." Then he reached out and took my hand. His hand was cold and dry like paper. "Let's find them," he said, and turned me around like he was guiding me. But we didn't go back the way I came. He led me to a side door at the end of the hall. It had a faded exit sign above it, barely lit. He pushed it open, and we stepped outside into the back of the building, into this weedy, overgrown area with a few broken benches, a couple of big green dumpsters, and a chain-link fence that separated the property from the woods. And that's when everything changed. His grip tightened. I mean, really tightened, like fingers digging into my skin. He started pulling me toward the trees. I didn't scream. I should have, but my throat locked up. I couldn't make a sound. My stomach turned cold and heavy like I'd swallowed ice. I remember thinking, I don't want to go in there. I don't want to disappear. And just when I thought he was going to drag me into the woods for good, a voice cut through the silence. "Hey!" It was a woman's voice, loud, panicked. I turned and saw one of the teachers, Ms. Bright, on the other side of the fence. Her face was twisted in horror and she was screaming. The man let go. He turned and ran full speed into the trees. I watched him vanish between the trunks like he'd done it 100 times before. Within seconds, more teachers burst through the exit door behind me. They grabbed me, pulling me close, some yelling, some crying. I think they didn't know whether to be mad or relieved. They called the police. They called my parents. The field trip was over. Just like that. They loaded us back onto the buses, trying to act calm. But you could feel it. This buzzing tension in the air, like something was still out there. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I looked out my window. That's when I saw him again. He was crouched behind a tree near the road, just sitting there watching. His face was partly hidden by branches, but I could see enough to know it was him. His eyes followed the bus like he was counting every kid inside. I didn't tell anyone, not because I didn't want to. I just couldn't. I felt frozen. Like if I said his name, he'd show up again. The rest of the ride home, the other kids stared at me like I was an alien. I could feel their eyes, but I didn't care. I just sat there staring out the window, hoping no one else would ever meet that man behind the chairs. And you know what still gives me chills? No one ever caught him. The police came. They asked questions. I gave a description, but no leads, no name, nothing. Hollow Creek shut down a few years later. The building's still there, though, rotting in the woods. People say it's haunted. If you go near it, you'll hear footsteps, or whispers, or see someone hiding in the shadows. I wouldn't know, because I never went back. Okay, so let me tell you about something that still gives me chills even years later. This happened back in 2011 when I was in 9th grade. I was going to school in this small, kind of fancy town in Vermont, and my best friend at the time was a kid named Eli. We'd known each other since elementary school, the kind of friends who didn't even have to speak to know what the other was thinking. Our school had this tradition of doing enrichment retreats and basically class trips to the middle of nowhere where we'd do team-building stuff, outdoor games, and pretend we were learning. That fall, the chorus group, which I had joined mostly to get out of gym class, took a trip to this old-school family resort in the mountains called Silverwood Pines. The place was tucked deep in the woods, near the New Hampshire border, quiet, rustic, and honestly a little creepy even in the daytime. There were about 20 of us plus 4 chaperones. We were staying for 3 nights. Eli and I got assigned cabin 6, which was on the far end of the property, near the edge of the woods and the lake trail. It was one of those wooden cabins with a sliding glass door on the back wall, facing a steep slope that led down to the lake. The first day was fine. Cold but fine. It was early November, so most of the resort was empty except for us. Eli and I goofed around, hit the go-karts, climbed the rock wall, and later hung out in the indoor pool with a couple of girls from our class, Jess and Maya. They were cool, and we all stuck together most of the day. After dinner, we went back to our cabin and just chilled. Now here's where it starts getting weird. It was around 10 p.m., and Eli and I were just lying in our beds, kind of half talking, half scrolling on our phones. The blinds on the sliding door were open because the moonlight looked amazing on the lake, all silver and still like a frozen mirror. Then Eli just suddenly sat up and shouted, Dude, what the? I bolted upright, heart pounding. He was staring straight at the glass door. I followed his gaze, and I swear I've never felt my blood go that cold before in my life. There was a woman standing just outside the door. Not moving, just standing there. She was tall, too tall. Her body was thin in a way that didn't look healthy, like bony arms and a neck that looked a little too long. Her hair was gray and stringy, hanging in clumps around her face. And her eyes. God, they were wide open, pressed right up to the glass like she was trying to see inside. We both froze. She didn't say anything. Didn't move. Just kept peering in, her hands cupped around her face like binoculars. After what felt like a full minute, she slowly stepped backward and disappeared into the darkness. Eli and I stared at each other, completely silent. Then we jumped out of bed and ran outside. The cold hit us instantly, but we barely noticed. We sprinted around the side of the cabin, scanning the path and the trees. Nothing. No one. The trail was empty. No footsteps in the frost. No rustling leaves. Just silence. We barely slept that night. The next morning, we didn't tell the teachers. Honestly, we thought maybe we imagined it. Like maybe it was a weird shadow or some prank. But when we told Jess and Maya, their eyes went huge. Jess said, "That sounds exactly like the woman we saw last night." They said they'd gone for a walk after dinner and spotted a tall woman near the maintenance shed. She didn't work there. None of the staff looked like that. When she noticed them watching, she vanished behind the trees. Okay, so now we're freaked. Night 2, we were extra careful. We shut the blinds, locked the door twice, even moved one of the chairs in front of it just in case. Eli fell asleep first. I tried to stay up just in case, but eventually my eyes started closing. I woke up a few hours later, no idea what time it was. Everything was pitch black except for a faint blue glow from the moon coming through the window above the beds. Something felt wrong again. I sat up, feeling that prickly fear crawling up my back. I called out, "Eli?" No answer. I turned to look at his bed, but I couldn't see him. There was something or someone standing between us. At first I couldn't make out the shape. My eyes were still adjusting, but as the figure shifted slightly in the moonlight, I saw the silhouette of that same tall woman. She was facing me, closer than before, right at the foot of my bed. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My chest felt like it was being crushed. Then she whispered, her voice dry, cracked. "Your door was open." She turned and walked away, back through the sliding door that was now slightly ajar. When I finally got the strength to move, I leapt out of bed and slammed the door shut. Eli sat up instantly, groggy and panicked. I told him what happened, and we both stayed up the rest of the night. Lights on, backs against the wall, holding those cheap aluminum flashlights like they were weapons. At dawn, we went to the dining hall, pale and exhausted. After breakfast, we walked back to cabin 6, and that's when we saw her again. In the cabin right next to ours, through the window, she was sitting on the bed. Hands folded in her lap, just sitting perfectly straight, not blinking, not moving, and she was looking straight at us. We ran. We didn't stop until we reached the main lodge and told the front desk staff everything. But they just kind of looked at each other awkwardly, like they didn't know how to handle it. Eventually, a guy from maintenance and a woman from guest services agreed to check it out with us. When we got to the cabin next door and knocked, there was no answer. But the door wasn't locked. Inside, there she was, same posture, same frozen expression, sitting stiffly on the edge of the bed like a mannequin. But this time we noticed something else. There was a man sitting on the other bed, just as motionless. He looked about 70, face sunken with deep purple shadows under his eyes. He didn't say anything, just looked up at us with a weird, faraway expression. The staff talked to them quietly, then pulled us aside. Apparently, they had checked in days ago under some fake-sounding name and didn't leave any emergency contact. They had some behavioral issues, the woman whispered. But here's the worst part. The staff refused to remove them, said they had no reason to. They paid. They're not doing anything wrong, they told us. We begged them to move us to another cabin, but they said everything was full. So we went to our teacher, Mrs. Harvey, and when we told her everything and finally, honestly, no holding back, that she actually believed us. She didn't even argue. An hour later, we were packing our stuff. The trip was cut short. Everyone was confused, but no one complained. I never went back to Silverwood Pines. I never want to. To this day, I don't know who that woman was, or how she got into our cabin, or what would have happened if I hadn't woken up. But sometimes I think about her voice, that low whisper. Your door was open and I double-check my locks every night. Back then, I was in this class called Legends and Mysteries at Pine Brook High. It wasn't your average school class. We didn't sit around reading textbooks. Instead, we watched old documentaries about haunted places, read real-life ghost stories, and even talked about local urban legends. It was the kind of class that made your skin crawl, in the best way. I loved it. My cousin Jake and I were in the class together. We were super close growing up, more like brothers than cousins. We'd always dared each other to watch scary movies alone or sneak into abandoned barns near the edge of town. So naturally, we jumped at the chance when our teacher, Mr. Langley, announced a field trip to an old forgotten town about 30 minutes outside of Pine Brook. The place was called Whistler's Grove. Yeah, even the name sounds creepy, right? Apparently, Whistler's Grove used to be a small mining village way back in the 1930s. But something happened, nobody really knew what, and the whole place was abandoned almost overnight. There were rumors, of course. Fires, sickness, something about a collapsed mine. Some people even said the town was cursed. Mr. Langley thought it'd be fun for us to investigate as amateur mystery hunters. That was his thing. He wanted us to think like detectives. So, one chilly Friday morning, we all loaded onto the school bus, about 20 of us, give or take, and set off down these winding country roads that barely looked like they'd been driven on in years. The farther we got from civilization, the quieter it got. No gas stations, no houses, just trees. Lots and lots of trees. Eventually, we turned onto this narrow dirt path that looked more like a trail than a road. It was full of potholes, and the bus creaked and groaned every time it hit a bump. Everyone started getting nervous. You could feel it in the air. That weird, tight feeling in your chest, like something was just off. When we finally rolled to a stop, the view outside the window looked like something out of a horror movie. The road had completely crumbled, weeds growing right through the cracks. Tall grass brushed against the sides of the bus, and just beyond the overgrowth were the buildings, crooked, broken-down structures with roofs that sagged like they were too tired to stand. Most of the windows were boarded up, and the ones that weren't just had this empty black stare, like the buildings were watching us. We stepped out, and the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. No birds, no wind, just the sound of our own footsteps crunching through dry grass. Even the sun seemed duller here, like the sky was trying to warn us. Mr. Langley gave us this whole speech about staying with the group, respecting the site, blah blah blah. But Jake and I already had a plan. We weren't sticking with the group. After about 10 minutes of following Mr. Langley toward an old church, Jake nudged me and whispered, "Let's check out that big one over there." He pointed at this tall, narrow building off to the side. It had to be at least 3 stories high, way taller than anything else in the village. Its brick walls were cracked like veins ran through them, and part of the roof had caved in. A metal door was bolted shut, but just beside it, half covered in weeds, was a dark hole in the ground. No way we were walking past that. We snuck away while everyone else was busy taking photos and reading plaques about the old mine. By the time we reached the hole, I could see that it wasn't just a ditch, it was an old entrance to a basement, like a cellar. There was a rusty metal ladder leading down into the darkness. "Dare you?" Jake grinned. I didn't even hesitate. "Let's go." He climbed down first, his boots clanking on the rungs. I followed, gripping my phone tight. Thankfully, we both had flashlights on our phones, otherwise we wouldn't have seen a thing. The basement smelled like mold and old water. The walls were stone, wet in some spots, and everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. Empty bottles, broken chairs, and rotting wooden beams were scattered across the floor. One wall had graffiti on it, just a red circle with 3 X's inside. Weird. Then we saw the stairs. Wooden, narrow, and half-rotten, they led up into complete darkness. No windows, no light, just black. We hesitated, but only for a second. I went first, every step creaking loud enough to make my heart pound. It felt like the whole staircase could give way at any second. Jake was right behind me, breathing shallow, trying not to make noise. At the top, we reached what must have been the second floor. The air was thicker here, warmer somehow. The hallway was tight, with several open doors leading to tiny rooms. It felt like the walls were pressing in on us. We slowly walked past the first room. Empty. The next one, also empty. Just old furniture and dust. But then we heard it. Thud, a heavy, solid sound, like someone dropped a brick. It came from the last room at the end of the hall. Jake and I froze. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. We didn't speak. We didn't move. Just listened, thud again. Closer this time. Jake leaned toward me and whispered, "What the hell was that?" I shook my head. We tiptoed toward the last room, holding our phones out like shields. My hand was shaking so badly the beam of light wobbled all over the place. Then we reached the doorway. What we saw inside is burned into my brain forever. 3 people, just standing there, not saying a word, not moving, just staring. They weren't homeless. Their clothes were too old, like 1940s old. One man wore suspenders and a filthy dress shirt. Another had a miner's helmet tucked under his arm. The third was a woman, her head tilted ever so slightly, her long black hair hiding half her face. They were standing in a triangle, facing us, their eyes locked right on mine and Jake's. We didn't scream. We didn't breathe. We just turned and ran, down the stairs, slipping on the dust, grabbing at the walls. I don't even remember touching the ladder. I just remember the light hitting my face when we burst out of that hole and into the open air. We didn't stop running until we saw the group again. Mr. Langley didn't notice we were gone. Or maybe he did and just didn't say anything. One of our classmates, a girl named Sarah, asked what happened. We told her part of it, that we found a weird room in one of the buildings. We left out the part about the people, but I knew she saw something on our faces because she didn't ask again. As we were leaving, riding away on the bus, I looked back out the window. Up at the tall building, there on the 3rd floor and the only window that wasn't boarded up, I saw someone. A pale face, watching, just watching. I never told Mr. Langley, never told my parents, but Jake and I still talk about it sometimes. He thinks they were ghosts, people who never really left Whistler's Grove. I'm not sure what to think. All I know is they weren't right, they didn't blink, they didn't move, they were just waiting.